Shalom, shalom. This is Moray Amir Ryder, and we are about to go over another Hebrew hermeneutics lesson. This is lesson 2 in the series, and this is where we break down John 8:2 through 11, the woman caught in the act of adultery. All right, so if you watched the previous lesson, lesson 1 of Hebrew hermeneutics, you'll know that this is basically just entry-level lessons for those who are new to the walk, who are either just transitioning from out of Christianity, or maybe they even have they've heard some things and they have one foot in, one foot out. They have questions and stuff like that. So these lessons are really foundational teachings where your mind has to be rebooted from all the things that you've previously learned from all of the indoctrination and the culture that was created to view the scriptures under a certain light. So you have to refresh that. You have to reboot that. You have to basically restore the foundation because it was built on sand. So these are foundational teachings to help you begin to see that there's more to the text than what's been presented. Isn't just some feel-good stories and stuff like that, and it isn't all about just living in prosperity and all of these things. There's some real meat in what's going on in some of these scenarios. So in this particular one, John 8:2 through 11, we're going over the woman caught in the act of adultery. Well, one thing that I was always taught when I was in Christianity about this is that this is the institution of grace, and that Jesus, he came and he instituted grace, and he was going against the system with the religious zealots and the what they call them, the Judaizers and the Pharisees, those who kept the law and didn't have the Spirit and all this other stuff. This ignorance, right? And I don't say that. Remember, I didn't call them stupid. I say ignorant, because a lot of them are only teaching what they were taught. See, just like in this walk, now they do have colleges for pastors to go to, seminaries and stuff like that. But they have a lot of pastors who don't have any professional training. So they're really just learning from somewhere, or just learning from just reading a book, a cursory reading of the book. They're still learning from those who are their peers and those who they look up to and have aspirations to be like. So a lot of that stuff still trickles down to them. So they're just propagating the same nonsense that someone else has propagated through ignorance. A lot of them are ignorant. Some of them, I believe, intentionally don't teach the right stuff, but a lot of the pastors are just ignorant. And we're all ignorant at something. There are a lot of things that I'm ignorant in. But my goal with this particular thing right here is to make you no longer ignorant to this portion of the scriptures. All right. So no, this was not the institution of grace or anything like that. What this actually shows is that the Messiah really adhered to the text as it was written. See, what happens when you start trying to create a religion or a belief system off of a book, but you start 70 to 75% of the way through the book, this is what you're going to encounter, where you see this, this is grace. This is where grace started, where grace always existed. It was always there. This isn't new. But when you look at the scenario in context and understanding what was written prior to this, you will see that the Messiah was just observing Torah. And he was doing what they should have been doing, and that was acting in accordance to righteous judgment. See, the thing is, I pray that you all get to a point in your walk, whether you're new or whether you're watching this and you've been in the walk for a while. But when I first came into the walk, I would write down scriptures on index cards. I would memorize them so that I can know what was there. And I would have rebuttals for people who had something to say, anybody who was trying to speak against. And this, I'm talking about when I was a brand new Hebrew, just fresh, waking up, wet behind the ears. I was I won't say very combative, but I was definitely down to debate at that time, which I'm no longer down to debate. But I was very, very down to debate at that time because I knew what was written there, but I didn't have an understanding of it. And I wasn't attempting to seek an understanding. But the difference is, when you have an understanding of something, you can tell who don't understand it. Like you talk to somebody who just watched some DIY stuff. Let's say if it was a carpenter and they just watch some DIY stuff, but you talk to somebody who is a master carpenter, right? They can tell who just talking fluff. Yeah, okay. this person just watched a few YouTube videos, and there's nothing wrong if you're just trying to do something around the house. But let's say you're trying to create a career out of this, and all you've done is watch some YouTube videos, and you never had no actual training, then then it becomes a problem, because there's other people at risk now at this point. And it's just like with this book, there are other people, when you begin to teach this book, there are other people who are at risk by listening to your teachings. So we need to attempt to get an understanding of these things. So when you get an understanding, you can see what other people have an understanding, and they don't have to quote scriptures all the time. A lot of the times in the New Testament, you will see someone quoting the scriptures, and they say it was written, it was said, or something like that. But here you see that the Messiah didn't quote one scripture. He didn't quote one scripture. He just lived it. And those who have an understanding of scripture can clearly see that he was observing Torah. But you have to have an understanding of what's already there. So let's go ahead and jump right in, and all of it will make sense. All right, so we got John 8:2-11. So one of the first things, well, I'll save that for just a second. Now, early in the morning, starting at verse 2. Now, early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him. And he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. Keep that in mind. Brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they set her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act." Keep that in mind. That's important. Now, Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? They said this, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Yahusha stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Yahusha was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Yahusha had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, "Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Yahusha said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. So for some reason, this is jumping out at me right now. So I'm just go ahead and say this so that I don't forget about it later. I know this is really been stated a lot. I mean, before I knew anything about the Bible, I always heard, he who without sin cast the first stone. And it was always about, you can't judge me. It was always, it's like, it's used as a defense mechanism to where someone's trying to tell you something you can't do, but you sin, so you can't tell me about something, and stuff like that. This isn't just a cute saying. There's an element of scripture here, once again, that he is not quoting. There's an element there that he is not quoting. This isn't just some scripture, this isn't just some saying that he's just saying. This isn't about, hey, don't judge her. You guys have sinned also. We need to be nice to her. No, this is not about that. This is not about that at all. So I just need, for some reason, that was just really standing out. So I had to say that, and we're going to get to that in a second. So there's so many things that's wrong here. One of the first things that's wrong here, before I even reference an actual scripture, one of the first things that's wrong here was that why? Here we go. Now this just popped up. So if you are new to the walk, don't be afraid to ask questions. You have a mind. The Most High created you with a mind for a reason. It gives you the ability to think. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We came from an environment where they discourage questioning the scriptures. They even will put some type of negative connotation on it, where if you question the scriptures, then you don't have faith. Or if you question the scriptures, you will go to hell. But what that did, not only is that inaccurate, but what that did is it caused pastors to have any line of questioning of what they teach. So what they say is standard, and what they say is to be believed, because you can't question what's being said. It created this atmosphere in this environment. But listen, Those shackles, it's time to go. It's time to free yourself from indoctrination. Ask questions. Ask questions. Ask questions to the text. Ask questions from those who attempt to teach you so that you can get a better understanding. In all thy getting, get understanding. This is what we're trying to get. This is how you successfully live this book out without having to quote scriptures and pretend that you know a lot of stuff just because you can quote scriptures. Just because you have some stuff memorized. We have to get an understanding. So one of the first things that's wrong with this was, why did they bring this woman to Yahusha? Why did they bring her to the Messiah? It was not his role to judge this woman. It was not his role to carry out some type of enforcement of things that were going on with this woman. It was not his role to do so. They had people for that. See, they had order, they had structure, and they had a certain way that things were supposed to operate. And I know we have a tendency to not want to abide by those certain things, but they had that. That was not his role to judge the matters of the people. He may be a high priest in the heavens next to the Father of creation, but on earth, he was a carpenter's son. He was from the tribe of Judah. He was not a priest. He was not a Levitical priest. And he was not an elder. So it was not his role to judge this matter. It wasn't. So their heart was dealing wickedly with their brother from the onset. We know this because it even says it in the text that they wanted to trap him. They was looking at some way to instigate an issue, some way to get him to either misjudge, miscategorize. They want to see what he knows, see if he can get caught up and stumble so they can have something to accuse him with. That was it. So their hearts were evil towards him from the very beginning. From the very beginning, their heart were evil towards him. So that's the first thing that was wrong before we even go into the scriptures to prove this point that I'm making. All right. So verse 3, it says, the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. That's great. All right. They caught a woman. So that means they caught a woman. They must be witnesses, right? Because they said to her, teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. If you're in the very act of doing something, that means you're in motion. They saw you doing it. You're, i.e., caught red-handed. So apparently they witnessed this, right? Or did they? Let's find out. So Leviticus 20:10, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife. And let's get an understanding here right now. This is how you commit adultery. You commit adultery by sleeping with another man's wife. So men, you have your own domain. You stay out of another man's domain. You run your own jurisdiction. You do not cross into another man's jurisdictions. Just like even in law enforcement has certain jurisdictions where they are to operate. You don't begin to operate in someone else's jurisdiction. So the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer, yes, these have genders. That's a male, right? That's a male. The adulterer and the adulteress, that's a female, shall surely be put to death. So let's go back to the text. It says this woman was caught in the very act. So if you're caught in the very act, that means you should have saw who? The woman, and who else? This guy, the man. You should have saw the woman and the man. But when they presented the scenario to the Messiah, who did they present? A woman. They presented the woman only. So let's go back to that scripture, Leviticus 20:10. So you see that the man and the woman should be put to death, but they only brought the woman. What's another one? Deuteronomy 22:22. If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband. See, these scriptures are very specific. It's only us who begin to twist them and make them try to be something else because we have our own agendas. But this is very specific. If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them should die. The man that lay with the woman and the woman. So you should put away the evil from Israel. It is evil to do such a thing. But how are they operating? They're operating by violating this here. They're attempting to have some type of judgment performed on this woman in violation of Leviticus 19:15. It says, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. It is a very unjust thing. And I remember I did used to have some debates with individuals. I don't debate no more, but I used to have to debate with individuals like, no, she was caught sinning, she should die. But that's not what the text says. That's not what the text says. How can you do that? How do the man just go scot-free when they both were caught? They were caught in the act. They were caught in the act. It wasn't just her caught in the act. She can't be caught in the act by herself, committing adultery. So it's injustice that they were doing. Now it says, now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. What do you say? What do you say? Let's get down to the next portion. So my take here is that they wanted him to, because just like Paul get accused of teaching stuff that he didn't teach, the Messiah get accused of doing things that he didn't do, either blaspheming or breaking the Sabbath and stuff like this. I mean, Christianity has made it a staple to say that he went against the Sabbath, or he fulfilled it, or he did away with the law. He broke the Sabbath. I've heard people like teach this, like he broke the Sabbath. Do you know what that means if he would have broke the Sabbath? That's nonsense. You clearly should not be teaching anyone. You clearly shouldn't. Now, of course, I'm speaking of Christians. I haven't heard Israelites say that he broke the Sabbath. That's absurd. But you shouldn't be teaching anyone if you're talking about he broke the Sabbath and then going to try to give reasons on how he was. It just doesn't make any sense. But what I believe that they were trying to do was they was trying to get him to go against what the Torah said by maybe doing something or pronouncing a judgment that he should not have judged. Or if the judgment says that she is to be stoned, they wanted to see if he would say, well, she's supposed to be stoned. Deuteronomy 17:9-13. And you should come to the priest. This is if you have some type of issue. So there's been some type of proceeding, right? Judgment is getting ready to be laid down. So you just had the proceeding, judgment is getting ready to be laid down. You shall come to the priest, the Levites, and to the judge there in those days, and inquire of them. They shall pronounce upon the sentence. They shall pronounce upon you the sentence of judgment. This is why I was saying that they weren't even supposed to bring her to Yahusha. This was the role of the priests, the Levites, and the judge in those days. So once again, they started off wrong. Secondly, it says, you shall do according to the sentence which they pronounce upon you in the place that the Lord chooses, that Yahuwah chooses, and you shall be careful to do according to all that they order you. So whatever that judgment is supposed to be carried out. So this is why they're stressing Moses in the law said that such should be stoned. But what do you say? And it gives right here the hint. The writer gives the hint that this was their motivation behind it. Let's go back to the scripture. So according to the sentence of the law in which they instruct you, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do. Because guess what? If he would have said, it's funny, because if he would have said, no, she is not to be stoned, you know what would have happened? They would have had some type of ought to bring against him, where he's speaking against what the law says. And if he would have said that she is to be stoned, then guess what? They would have had some type of ought against him. So he answered it. He's so smooth the way he answered it. They would have had some type of ought against him because guess what? The man was not there. The man wasn't there. Okay, so where was I? According to the sentence of the law in which they instruct you, according to the judgment which they tell you, you shall do. You should not turn aside to the right or to the left, or you should not turn aside to the right hand or to the left from the sentence which they pronounce upon you. Now, the man who acts presumptuously and will not heed, once again, this is what I believe they were attempting to do. The priest who stands to minister there before Yahuwah your Elohim or the judge, that man shall die. So they have been wanting to put Yahusha to death for a while already. They've been wanting to put him to death. And so they was looking at some way to trap him. Once again, what's your motivation? So the people shall hear and fear and no longer act presumptuously. So if there is a commandment that's saying that such and such should be done, then such and such needs to be done. But that was their motive. So here we go. Let's follow this up. So they bring the woman to him. It's only the woman. It's not the man. They tell him what the law states, and they want to know what he says. But he doesn't say anything. He just writes on the ground. He answered them so smooth. Now, I used to hear people say that he probably wrote their sins on the ground and all of this stuff. And they just it's a whole bunch of craziness that I would hear said about this scripture and what he was possibly writing. But that was the one I most commonly heard, that he was writing their sins on the ground. And on face value, that is inaccurate. None of us know what he actually wrote, but I have a pretty good idea. At least it's plausible in my estimation. One of the things that I think he wrote is probably the scripture. It's probably the scripture. And he says, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Why did he say that? It's the reason he said that. See, here's the thing. It says in Deuteronomy 17:6-7, whoever is deserving of death shall be put to death on a testimony or 2 or 3 witnesses. Okay, here we go. 2 or 3 witnesses. He should not be put to death on a testimony of 1 witness. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death. And afterward, the hands of all the people. So you should put away the evil from among you. So if any one of them were witnesses, and keeping in mind that everything that they were doing, they were acting corruptly anyway. But if any one of them were actual literal witnesses, because she was caught in the act. Now, I beg the question now, did they catch her in the act? Or did they bring her to him off some he say, she say? Because if they were really attempting to get judgment and they were really attempting to carry out the law, then someone, you would presume, should have been a witness, because they said she was caught in the very act. And so that person should have been man enough to step up and pronounce itself like, hey, I saw her, and be prepared to be the first one to throw that stone. And even still, once again, I can honestly say I don't believe it would have went forward with that, because there was so much wrong here. But however, nevertheless, that person should have been the one to step up and say something and begin to cast that first stone. But you have to be a witness to cast a stone. You have to be a witness. The witnesses, the hands of the witnesses should be the first against him to put him to death. So no one stood up to put him to death or to put her to death. So that tells me that none of them were actual witnesses. Or that they realized that, hey, dude, this has just got real serious. He didn't do what we thought he didn't do what we wanted him to do or thought he was going to do. This has got serious. So it's time for us to back out on this one. We know we was kind of wrong anyway. It's time to bounce. But this scripture is there. And so he begins to write on the ground, to go back to write on the ground. And then they were convicted. So something about the writing or what they heard convicted them. So it could have been a writing. It could have just been what they heard. I know this text says what they heard. So him saying that could have brought to their remembrance this scripture here. It is Deuteronomy 17:6-7, where the hands of the witnesses got to be the first one. Either way, the bottom line was, with all the things that they did wrong in attempting to bring this woman to the Messiah, to bring it only the woman. Their motive was wicked to begin with. Their judgment was unrighteous. All the things that was wrong here really shows how wise the Messiah was and how he interacted with them. But it also shows how well he knew Torah. And also knows how well he knew Torah and how well he lived it, because he didn't quote one thing. And there's a bunch of scriptures that we just brought up just in these verses here. And he didn't quote one thing. So that's a snapshot of what it looks like when you understand what is written. So therefore you can live it without always having to quote. Quoting is cool. I'm not against quoting at all, but I am against the memorization for the sake of memorization, because then you use the scriptures as a weapon. And I see that far too often on both sides of the fence, where just memorized scriptures become weapons, where something happens or someone says something and then you throw out a scripture like it's a bullet. So that's pretty much it for this lesson here. It's a very, very, very simple, but we gotta, if you're new, you gotta establish your footing in Torah. You gotta start there. You gotta go back to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and find out what it is that they stood on. Because if you don't understand what they stood on, you won't understand why they were punished later on. You won't understand why the Messiah had to come. You won't understand who he had to come for. You won't understand anything else in the book because you don't understand the principles of which the people live by. All right. So that's all for this lesson right here. Like I say, pretty simple. John 8:2-11. This has been Moray Amir Writer. And until next time, peace and shalom.